Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Veritas Prep GRE free seminar. My name is David Newland, and I'm going to be your Veritas Prep GRE expert for today. Just a little bit about myself. I've been with Veritas for over a dozen years now. And I've worked with the GMAT, the GRE, the LSAT for more than 14, going to 15 years now. I've taught over 200 courses with Veritas, and I am currently the lead instructor for Veritas for the GRE. So I'm very pleased to see you guys here today for our strategy seminar, and that's what it's really all about. It's really all about the strategy. The online classroom is interactive, so please participate. I'll let you guys know that here in Vermont, where I live, quite close to a couple of the ski mountains, it's just started snowing. So we're looking at approximately 2 feet of snow that's coming in. If anybody wants to let me know where you guys are located, you can see we've got our globe over here. It's always fun to know where people are at. Do please participate throughout. If you've got an answer, type it in. If you've got a question, type it in. You know, use that chat box, and I'll definitely see what you guys have to say. Okay? So, at any point in time, when you've got a question for us, go ahead and put it right in there. Let's get started. So, the GRE is a reasoning test. The GRE is absolutely a reasoning test. So what you'll find is that when you look at what's called Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, it's a fancy education pyramid. At the bottom of that pyramid, we have understanding and remembering. So that if people are going to learn, they have to understand, they have to remember things, right? And as we move up to being able to apply that knowledge. And then finally, we move up to being able to evaluate and even to create. Well, with the Veritas Prep pyramid, we change this around a little bit. The bottom level is that skill builder level. So remember, that's the level of understanding, right, and remembering. So many of the Veritas books, including, this is the arithmetic book. In our Veritas course, this is the second lesson, is the arithmetic lesson. You can see that this book is divided into 2 sections here with the tabs. The first section, the first 80 pages of this book is the skill builder. So what we've done at Veritas is we've taken all of that information that you need to know for the arithmetic. We've taken all that information you need to know for the arithmetic, we've put it into the Veritas books. So if you're in the Veritas course and you say, hey, what do I need to know about fractions, ratios, percents, arithmetic number properties, all of these things, that's considered the skill builder level. So in the Veritas course, we do the skill builder before class. So you have to know these things coming into class. Then we go to skills meet strategy, and that's where we're going to go today. I obviously don't have time in the time that we have with us, this hour that we have today. I don't have the time to, talk to you about vocabulary and geometry, formulas and number properties and things like that. In the Veritas course, you get those, right, before class so that when you come into class, you know those. Now today, we're going to talk about strategy, and we're going to help you to think like the test maker. And these are what we do in the Veritas lessons. Okay, we apply this knowledge in terms of strategy. How do we answer the different question types on the quantitative section? How do you use that formula that you know? On the verbal section, okay, I know some vocabulary, but I don't know every word. How do I get the most correct answers I can? Strategy is a big part of it. And finally, if you can think like the test maker, what this means to think like the test maker is to understand how the traps are created, how they're able to get you to pick the wrong answers, and if you understand how they're created, you can avoid those. So we get all of those in the Veritas class. Today it's going to be strategy that we're going to look at. Now, obviously, you're not going to be doing problems like this, which are just little visual problems, But if I were to ask you, which of the horizontal lines is longer? Which one of these looks longer? The top one looks longer, right? Doesn't the top one look like it's longer? But if I talk about the horizontal part of it, then you'll see that they're the same length. So this is just, obviously you're not going to have on the GRE, you're not going to have this exact setup. But what we have here is kind of an illusion, a too good to be true sort of thing. Oh yeah, they're equal. But if you analyze it, you see that they're not. And that is something that we see on the exam. And then over here, we've got either a chalice in black or we've got two people facing each other in the white. So this is showing us that, hey, we have to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives. If you can see this both as the sort of negative part of it, the absence, which is the chalice, or if you look at the sort of the positive part of it, which is the two people, then you're seeing both aspects of this. And on the exam, you need to be able to see things in multiple different ways. Oh, I could combine this, or I could do it this way. So being able to see multiple different ways is the way to go. So if we look at this as an example, this is a bit of an example of almost that sort of optical illusion, okay? So take a quick look at this, and if anybody wants to type into the chat there, if you want to type in which of these answers that you think is correct, I'm going to write a couple things up on the board over here, but let's see if you guys have some answers for me on this. So I've got a few things on here that I would love to talk about with you guys. And first of all, we can see that we have an A, B, C, D over here, okay? And then we have the different answer choices. So this corresponds to the answer choices. Now, when this says quantity A is greater, it means quantity A is greater always. So we need to be able to say that quantity A is always bigger. If so, the answer is A. If quantity B is always bigger, the answer is B. And if they're always equal, the answer is C. Okay? So if you can get either A to be greater for always, or B to be greater always, or C, that's your answer. But if the relationship cannot be determined, that's answer choice D. You know what we mean when we say the relationship cannot be determined? What we mean is this. You can get more than one of these three. If you could get A to be greater and then turn around and get B to be greater, the answer is D. If you could get B and C, the answer is D, or A and C. So if you get any combination of more than one of the top three answers, the answer is D. So that's why answer choice D is set off on its own. When they say the relationship cannot be determined, I don't want you to think that this, means sort of literally nobody has any idea, because that's very rarely going to happen on this exam. What is going to happen on this exam is you can find more than one of these three answers, which takes you down here. Now, the next thing that I've written up here is the core number properties, and we're talking about strategy. This is the strategy seminar. So one part of strategy is to make sure that for this quantitative comparison, which is the most strategic of all GRE math questions, quantitative comparison is the most strategic of all the question types. But so we have the strategy here of keeping track, and we'll go through this some more. But we also have the strategy of thinking of core number properties, positive, negative, non-integers like fractions and decimals, and 0 and 1. We also want to think about what's the minimum and the maximum. If we keep these in mind, if we keep these core number properties and minimum, maximum in mind, then we can think like that test maker and outsmart a lot of their traps. So the trap on this one is if you just look at this visually, this is xy, and the absolute value, the square root of x squared y squared looks to be xy as well. So this looks like it's going to be answer choice C. But in reality, it's actually the absolute value of xy. In reality, it's the absolute value of xy because when you square something, it's no longer negative. When you take the square root of something, it's no longer negative. So there's simply no way for the left-hand side here, quantity A, there's no way for this to be negative. So it's not just xy, it's actually the absolute value of xy, because we're either talking about positive or 0, and in this case, it can't be 0 because neither one of those is 0. So just from a number properties perspective, quantity A is going to have to be positive because we're taking the square root of a square, and a negative doesn't survive that. You know, if you have -5, it becomes positive 25 when you square it. If you have -3, it becomes positive 9 when you square it. Now, what about quantity B over here? Well, this is negative and this is positive. So for quantity B, we have a negative times a positive, and of course that means this is always going to be negative. So we are able to answer always on this. We're able to answer that quantity A is always bigger than quantity B. Positive is always bigger than negative. Quantity A is always bigger than quantity B. Okay? So that means that the answer choice for this one is simply going to be answer choice A. When you can establish a number property, that's one of the cases in which you are absolutely able to say that you have always bigger or always equal. Now, if you didn't get this from a number property perspective, you could throw some numbers in here as well. And you could simply say, okay, if x is negative, I'm just going to have x equal -2. And if y is positive, I'm going to have y equal +3. So over here, this is obviously, boom, -6, right? -2 times 3, -6. You come over here, and now what you're going to get is -2 squared times 3 squared, and you take the square root. Well, this is just going to be 36. Square root of 36, that's +6. So +6, -6. All right. So that's our first one. We're already working into the strategy on this one in a pretty big way. Now, the reason why we didn't end up with answer choice D at all is because we only had one check mark, and that was next to A. Because obviously B can't be bigger, obviously they can't be equal. Now, here's what would make answer choice D on this. What if, in fact, this did not say x is less than 0? What if this said x is less than or equal to 0? What if it could be equal? And then it just said, let's say y is positive. Well, if x was able to be 0, then this could come up 0 and this could come up 0, and that would mean quantity C was possible, and the answer would then be D. Because anything times 0 is 0, so each of these could be 0. So it would be possible to have C, and that would give you an answer choice of D. So whenever you can get more than one answer, A, B, C, when you can get more than one of those, the answer is D. In this case, we could not, because of course this is hypothetical. In fact, we're told that x is definitely negative. There is no 0. The question is, who are they rewarding on this exam? If you think about this strategically, right? It's a strategy session. Who are they rewarding? Are they rewarding the person who just looks at this and goes, oh, that's xy, boom, they're equal? No. Obviously, you only get a certain number of questions, 20 questions per section. Each one counts. They're going to reward the person who really looks at this, who digs into this. So if you can prove A, B, or C is true, try to get another one of those. And if you do, the answer is going to be D. So here is the actual step-by-step process for quantitative comparison as we just did. So you write A, B, C, D up there first. So here's your step-by-step process. Figure out which one is easiest to prove. Is it easier to prove A is larger, B is larger, or they're equal? Let's say it's easier to prove A is larger. So confirm that you can actually get that result. Don't just put down that A is larger. Confirm that you can actually get that result. The correct answer must now be that answer or choice D. So we would now mark off B and C. The answer would either at this point be A or D. Work to make one of the other two answers acceptable as well. So try to prove either, in this case, B or C. If you're able to, if you can prove C, then the answer is going to be D. If you can't, the answer is going to be A. So that's going to be our step-by-step process for the quantitative comparison. Let's try that process when we look at this example. So let's put A, B, C, D up here again. And let's again remember the positive, negative, non-integers, and 0 and 1. And let's don't forget minimum, maximum as well. So that's our core number properties, and that's going to be our ABCD. So let's take a look at this one. Just take a little minute or so and look at this one. So the first thing you want to do is, not really get too caught up in trying to be perfect, right? So perfect is the enemy of a great score in the sense that don't sit around thinking of the perfect number to use. Any number that fits what they say is good enough on your first go-round to get your first answer. So R is the remainder when positive integer x, now that's important, is divided by positive integer x minus 1, and that's important as well. When you think about these core number properties, and we know that we have a positive integer, well, positive negative is out, non-integers is out, right? So positive negative is out, non-integers is out, and 0 is out. So the only number property left is 1, as well as minimum maximum. Just make sure to pick a number that's a positive integer. So let's just say x equals 5. So that's going to be positive integer x, which I'm going to say is 5, and that's going to be divided by positive integer x minus 1. So x minus 1 is going to be equal to 4. So you're going to have 5 divided by 4. Well, clearly 5 divided by 4 gives you 1 remainder of 1. 4 goes into 5 once, 1 left over, 1 remainder 1. So at this moment, we can get remainder of 1, and we can have these be equal. So that means we put a check mark next to C, and we cross off A and B. And the answer at this point is either C or D. It's going to be D if we can get more than one of these. So 5 is just a, it's just a normal number to pick, just to see what's happening. But 5 does happen to be an odd number. It does happen to be a prime number. So maybe there's something about odd numbers or prime numbers that's going to give me something different. So let me just pick an even number and a number that's not prime, and maybe even not a multiple of 5. Let me just pick 12. Let's just say 12. So let's say x is 12. And that means x minus 1 would be 11. So when 12 is divided by 11, you know what you get? You get 1 remainder of 1. When you think about it, just about any number that's divided by that number minus 1, it's just going to give you 1 minus 1. It's just going to give you 1 remainder 1, right? 5 over 4 is 1 remainder 1. 12 over 11 is 1 remainder 1. 50 over 49. 31 over 30, whatever you can think about, you're going to get the same thing, 1 remainder 1. So this is absolutely looking like it's going to be answer choice C. But let's don't forget, we still have one of our core number properties left. Positive negative's out, non-integers is out, 0 is not positive, right? So that's out, but the number 1 is still there. And also when you think about minimum maximum is still there. So the minimum possible number is actually going to be 2. if x equals 2, then x minus 1 would equal 1. Right? So some people say x should be 1. X cannot be 1. Because if x is 1, x minus 1 is 0. You're never allowed to divide by 0. So 2 and then 1, right? So 2 and then 1, and that's going to give us 2 remainder of 0. Because 1 goes into 2 evenly. So the only number that's going to give us something different, and that's why it's one of our core number properties, is the number 1. Because now we have a remainder of 0. So if we come over here, if we now have remainder of 0 compared to the quantity 1, 1 is bigger. So now we put a check mark next to B, and we circle D. When you have those two options, in this case B and C, then that's going to mean that our answer is going to be D, because we have, again, more than one option, which means the relationship cannot be determined because you have the relationship going different directions. Be sure to what we call play devil's advocate. As I mentioned, the first number you pick doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter that much. The first number you pick, okay, let me pick 10, or let me pick 7, or let me pick 5, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter because it's going to give you an answer. It's going to give you a yes. It's going to give you an A. It's going to give you a B, a C, whatever it is. It's going to give you an answer. Okay? But then you say, let me try very hard to get the other answer. That's what play devil's advocate means. Try to get the other answer. So if you've already gotten A, you're trying to get B, you're trying to get C. And when you're doing that, thinking about positive, negative, non-integers, 0 and 1, and the biggest and the smallest. Let's look at a little bit of a geometry situation on this one. And again, I'll just give you something like 60 seconds to think about this. Let's put ABC over here and D. I don't usually write up the core number properties for a geometry because it's not usually about, positive, negative, or something like that. Take a look at this one for a quick moment. So as we look at this, we got to think about, of course, isosceles. Isosceles means at least 2 sides angles are equal. Okay? So let's start off that way. Let's draw out this triangle here. And so now we have triangle LMN. So let's put LMN. And we're told that angle LNM measures 60. So this is going to be 60 degrees right here. Okay? 60 degrees sounds nice when it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing. So 60 degrees actually sounds quite lovely. So measures 60 degrees. Now we know that it's going to be isosceles. So we're looking for that equality, right? So we know it's going to be isosceles, so we're looking for a couple of sides, a couple of angles to be equal. So this particular angle over here, let's call that one 60. Now quantity A is LM and quantity B is MN. So if we make this one quantity A right here and make this one quantity B here, if we were to have these two angles be the isosceles pair, you can see that the sides opposite from those would be equal. So this would give us the sides being equal. Put a check mark next to C. The answer is either C or D. It can't be A and it can't be B. So then we say, okay, Let's take a look at this, and let's make something else the equal pair. So let's have the 60-degree angle be this one up here to go along with that. Well, as you can see, if you have these two as 60, that adds up to 120. And that leaves you with 60 because the triangle goes to 180. That's one of those properties that you get for free, of course, with geometry. Well, that means that this is 60, this is 60. So again, A and B are equal. A and B are again equal. So it's still answer choice C. And then finally, what if we take this out and make these the equal pair? Well, if that one is 60 to begin with, as we're told up here, that leaves you with 120. If you make these two equal, what's 120 divided by 2? It's 60. So each of those are going to, again, be 60. So it actually turns out, the answer is going to be C on this. It actually turns out that if you have an isosceles triangle and any angle is 60, every angle is 60. It's equilateral. Okay? So we played a little bit of devil's advocate there. We tried to get something different. But we weren't able to get anything different. We were only able to get that A and B are equal. So that makes answer choice C, our answer. Okay, let's take it to one more question here. So again, quantitative comparison is the most strategic of the types. So that's why we focus on quantitative comparison in this strategy lesson. So let me put A, B, C, D up here again. Just look at this one for a moment and see what you think about quantity A and what you think about quantity B. Okay, so as we look at this, we see that J plus K equals 4. Okay? So we have J plus K equals 4. That means we're just looking for M plus N. This has a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, maybe push a lot of people towards answer choice D. For me, I'm going to say that I don't think this is going to be answer choice D at all. And the reason why I don't think this is going to be answer choice D at all is that J and K and M and N are the only variables. They're the only unknowns. And so those are in the two quantities. It's also true, and again, from a strategic perspective, it's also true that whenever you have more variables put together, you're more likely to get an answer for that. So, for example, we might be able to figure out what M plus N equals without knowing what M equals or what N equals. So if you had something like this instead, I would be far more likely to think the answer is D. I would be far more likely to think the answer is going to be D because it's much more difficult to get the specific value of one variable on this exam than it is to get the value of two variables. You might look at M plus N and say, well, for me to get M plus N, I need to know what M is and what N is. That's a lot of work, but it's actually not probably going to be that way. It's actually more likely to be the case that you know what m plus n is, but neither of the underlying variables m by itself or n by itself. So I'm not looking at this to be answer choice D. If I'm out of time and I have to maybe I don't know quite where to go and I have to flag this thing and come back, or it's the last question and I'm out of time, I'm not going to go with D here. I'm also not thinking it's really going to be answer choice C. And the reason for that is we're going to equal 12. Well, this is probably either going to be addition to get to 12 or multiplication. If it's addition and it's 4 plus 8, right, then B is bigger. If it's multiplication and it's m plus n equals 3, 4 times 3, then A is bigger. So we probably either have B is bigger, we have A is bigger. I don't see a situation where this is going to be exactly 4 as well. So again, if I only had 30 seconds on this, I would quickly be down to A versus B. Now let's actually solve this and see where that comes in. In order to be able to solve this, we're going to try to isolate J plus K. So the way to isolate J plus K would be to put like Jm plus Km. And if we factored an m out of both parts of this, if we divided both parts by m, if we factored that m out, then we would have m times the quantity j plus k. You see that? And if we did the same thing with n, so if we wrote this as jm plus km plus jn plus kn, of course, equals 12. Now we can factor in n from both parts of this. And so now we're going to have plus n times the quantity j plus k, right? And so the whole thing equals 12. So look what we've done. We've now pulled out that j plus k in a meaningful way here. So you could just, at this moment, you could just go ahead and turn this into 4, right? You could just go 4m plus 4n equals 12. That would be certainly one way to do this. You could say 4m plus 4n equals 12. And then you could factor a 4, and you could say 4 times the quantity m plus n equals 12. And you can see right now that m plus n has to be 3. And that's going to mean that quantity B is going to be bigger than quantity A. M plus n has to be 3. So the correct answer to this one is going to be B. You could also, rather than replacing this with the 4, because that's not an option every time, you could also treat m and n, of course, as coefficients. So you could say the quantity m plus n, just as if this was a 3 and this was a 2, you'd have 5, right? 3 and 2, you'd have 5 times j plus x. So m plus n are the coefficients, and that's going to be m plus n times the quantity j plus k. And that's going to equal 12. Well, j plus k is 4. M plus n, we know, has to be 3. So that's going to mean that m plus n is, of course, did I go the wrong way? Sorry, my fault. I went the wrong way on that. The quantity is A. Sorry about that. The quantity is A. 4 is bigger than 3. Be really careful on test day to make sure you don't do all the great algebra and then accidentally say that 3 is bigger than 4, okay? So that's your strategy lesson for that one, is to make sure that you point that arrow in the right direction. So the quantity 4 is bigger than 3, so the answer is going to be A. Hey, this is not a vocabulary test on the verbal side the way it used to be. Up until 2011, this was a vocabulary test, and you would be faced with something like this. Some of this vocabulary. The College Board elegizes anachronistic verbiage with recondite panegyric. I mean, what does any of that mean? Some of this actually isn't too bad, but recondite panegyric, that's definitely your A-level vocabulary right there. What this actually means is the College Board delivers a funeral speech for old-time and out-of-place word usage, that's what anachronistic verbiage is, by way of an obscure tribute. That's what recondite panegyric. Recondite is obscure, and panegyric is a tribute. In other words, the GRE is not a vocabulary test anymore. It's a test of logic on the verbal side. Yes, you do have to know some vocabulary. You do have to know some vocabulary. So here we have altruistic, adverse, divergent, inconsequential, assiduous. It certainly helps for you to know some vocabulary. Absolutely it does. But it's also going to help even more than that for you to have some strategy. I know I've worked with a lot of students who will know all 5 words and yet can still end up picking the wrong word because of the lack of strategy, the lack of context. It's not just about knowing the vocabulary. In fact, you could know fewer than all of these and still have, if not 100% chance, then pretty close. So just read this one for a second and we will talk about the best strategy to use for a little text completion sentence equivalence here. You do have to know some vocabulary. And the text completion sentence equivalence book for the Veritas lesson has a great skill builder in it where we talk about prefixes, suffixes, root words, kind of how to put things together. Maybe you don't know assiduous, but maybe you know that "-us" means like full of. So you can kind of get maybe something going right there. Maybe you know that "in" means that something isn't or doesn't have that property. Like if something is inflammable, it's not flammable. So "in" basically means not. I mean, you can start working with those suffixes, with those prefixes, things like that, to at least give you some concept. If you don't happen to perfectly know the word, at least some concept. And so while all but one of the quantitative lessons in the Veritas course has a big skill builder, the lessons that do have really nice skill builders in the Veritas course are arithmetic, algebra, the geometry / statistics and combinatorics, and word problems and data analysis. So all of those lessons in the Veritas lesson books, there's a great skill builder. The best skill builder on the verbal side is going to be the text completion and sentence equivalence to help you out with root words, prefixes, suffixes, things like that. So another advantage of that. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of what I do in that lesson. And I just want to remind you guys that you can sign up for lesson 1 of the Veritas Prep, the actual course, and you can come to that for free. So lesson number 1, you can check that one out for free. And I do have some lessons that start pretty soon. And so at the end of the class, there'll be a list of when courses start. So I'll talk even more about what I'm about to talk about now if you come to that, check out that lesson for free. First lesson of any Veritas Prep GRE course. Now, let's talk about a few things. I'll talk about 3 things right now. The first thing I want to talk about is I definitely want to talk about transition language. The second thing I want to talk about is fill in the blank. And the third thing is process of elimination. So let's talk about transition language. Let's talk about filling in the blank with your own word. Okay, fill in yourself. And then let's talk about number 3, and this is a big one, and that is process of elimination. So root words here. Transition words here. So despite. So despite the warnings. So in other words, hey, we've been warning something, right? Despite the warnings, the project has not yet had. So, there's a winter storm warning that started 40 minutes ago here in Vermont, right? It's going to snow like crazy. But despite that warning, it's not snowed very much yet, right? So when you're warning, something bad's going to happen. So if despite the warnings, something has not yet happened, well, you use those transitions to understand, you can fill in that blank yourself, has not yet had a bad effect, a negative effect, right? Despite the fact, so if we're warning of something, then we're obviously expecting a bad or a negative effect, which has not yet happened. So you could fill in that blank yourself, and now that's a majority of the way. If you can follow the transitions, if you can work your way through the logic of the sentence, and this one isn't too bad, you can work your way through the logic of the sentence, and you're able to fill that in yourself, now you just have to find a way to match up what you're looking for. And so that becomes very, very important. So look for the transition language. We've got more techniques than this, actually. We've got another 3 techniques. We've got like double this that we talk about in lesson 3 in the course. But I picked out the ones that I think are the most important for you, so I could talk about these, in the next 15 minutes with you guys right now. So you look for that transition language, you figure out the logic of the sentence, and if you can, you fill in that blank yourself. And now it's just a matter of really matching it up. So let's talk about process of elimination, because this is something that people do not understand or apply correctly, and this is a strategy session, and so this is the biggest bit of strategy we're going to have all night right here. So let's say you don't know the word assiduous. But let's say you do know altruistic, adverse, divergent, inconsequential. These 4 are somewhat difficult vocabulary, but these are something that if you're really looking to do well on the GRE, you probably should know. If not all 4 of those, you should be pretty close. Okay, so those are words you should probably know. Assiduous is probably a little bit more difficult. That's stepping it up a level. When I work with this question in class, I find that more than half the class doesn't know assiduous, and there's no other word that comes close to that. So more than 50% of people don't know this, but there's no other word that's like that. So let's pick on assiduous right now. Let's say you know the other 4. So you know these 4, you don't know this one. You should still get 100%. You should get this question right 100% of the time. If there's 5 options, you're picking 1, and you know 4 of them, you've no excuse for missing this question. If you miss this question, you're going to miss it because of something up here, or because you don't have the strategy. Because if you don't know one word, this is all you have to do, and this is what process of elimination is all about. You simply focus on the words you do know. If you focus on the words that you do know, it'll either be one of these 4 words, in which case you pick that word, or if it's not one of these 4, you trust yourself. You say, I don't know what assiduous means, and it doesn't matter what it means. Because if none of these work, it's got to be this one. If one of these does work, it's got to be that one, and don't worry about this. So if you know 4 out of 5 words, don't worry at all about the word you don't know. Don't even speculate. That's just going to get you in trouble. If you know all but one of the words, don't even speculate about the word you don't know. Okay? If one of these works, pick it. If it doesn't, pick the one you don't know. So you focus on the words you know, and then you trust yourself. Okay? So if you know 4 out of 5 words, you should get it right 100% of the time. 100%. Okay, once in a while we're going to make some kind of a mistake. I understand, 100% doesn't always happen. 99.5%, okay? Get them right. But what if you know 3 of the words? Let's say you don't know inconsequential. Let's say you know 3 of the words, but you also don't know inconsequential. So you don't know these bottom 2 words. You still focus on the words you know. You still have a 60% chance that it's the word, that it's one of these 3, right? So if you know 3 of the 5, you have a 60% chance that it's one of these 3, right? 60% chance that you know the word. So it's going to, one of those 3, right? And that leaves a 20% chance you don't. So right now you should be at an 80% probability of getting the correct answer if you know 3 out of 5. So 60% of the time it should be one of these 3. If it's one of these 2, then you don't know it. And if you randomly guess 50-50, right, you'll get it right another 10%. Another 40% of the time you don't know it, and 20% of the time you would guess correctly. That's what I mean to say. So that's 80%. So 60% of the time it's one that you know, 20% of the time you would guess correctly and get it between those 2. But I'm not satisfied with you just getting it right 80% of the time. I want you to get it right 85% of the time. If you know 3 out of 5, I want you to get it right 85% of the time, and here's how. If you're down to 2 words, try to get a lean one way or another, assuming it's not one of these 3, assuming that it's not altruistic, adverse, or divergent, and it's going to be one of these 2. Try to get a lean. How do I do that? Prefix, suffix, base words. Do you have an idea if the word is a little bit positive, it's a little bit negative? Is assiduous, have you ever heard anything like that in a context? Is it, all you need to know is, was it a little bit positive, right? Or something like, is it a word they use about people? Because sometimes there'll be a word that's not even really used about people. Some kind of a word that's not really used about people. So then you'll say, oh, well, then it's probably not that. So if you can tell that, if you're looking for something positive, we're looking for something negative, right? Well, maybe inconsequential would be considered more negative than assiduous. So try to figure out whether it's a little bit positive, a little bit negative, if it applies to people or if it doesn't. Try to figure out from the suffixes, the prefixes. All you're looking for is a lean at this point. You don't have to know what it means when you're down to 2. You just have to have an idea that one of them goes one way and one goes the other, and pick the one that goes your direction. So you can get to 85% even if you only know 3. You only know 60% of the words, but you can get the right answer to the question 85% of the time if you use process of elimination and you do it properly. So remember, focus on the words you know. If it's one of the words that you know, pick that word. If the ones you know don't work, then you have to go with what you don't know. If there's only one word you don't know, then you should be there 100% of the time. If there's 2 words you don't know, try to get a lean. If there's 3 words you don't know, you're going to have to lean a little harder, right? So, if the best situation is for you to know at least 3 out of 5, because then you've got a really solid chance of getting it right. Now, in this case, let's say, again, that we don't know inconsequential or assiduous. It doesn't matter, does it? Because bad or negative is adverse. So this one's going to be answer choice B. If you didn't know the bottom 2 words, don't worry about those, because adverse means bad or negative, and it works perfectly here. Okay? So focus on those transitions. Fill in the blank yourself if you can. And if you really want to turn this into a no-lose situation, get yourself to where you know at least 3 out of every 5 words and use process of elimination correctly. Because I guarantee you, if you can get 85% of your text completion right, and if you could keep that going with reading comprehension, if you could keep that going with sentence equivalence, getting 85% right, okay? Getting 85% right would give you a great score. It really would be a great score. So really jump on that a little bit. We've got some really strong strategies for the reading comprehension and the smaller section called critical reasoning as well. And look, if you join me for that first lesson of the course, let me just jump real quick. Let me show you what that first lesson is. So February 9th would be a first lesson. So that's not too far from now. That's going to be Saturday at 1:30 p.m. That's only is that 2 weeks or 3 weeks from today? 3? So that's only a couple of weeks away. March 12th would be another one. That would be Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And then April 1st would be Monday at 7 p.m. So join me for any of those first lessons. And not only will I get more into the text completion and sentence equivalence, but we'll also, and don't worry, I'll put that slide up at the end, but we'll also get into being able to really look at the reading comprehension and the critical reasoning part of it as well, because we've got strategies that are equally strong. Now, here we have an interesting question. We have 3 blanks here, so we have 9 words. You're going to fill in blank 1 is going to be here, blank 2 here, and blank 3 here. Now, what's interesting about this is whenever you have multiple blanks, there's 2 things you're looking for. Obviously, you're trying to fill in blanks with transition words. The way that we were able to fill this one in, because, hey, you know, this had to be negative, it had to be adverse. So we were able to fill this one in. When you have a single blank, of course, the clues have to fill this in for you. But when you have multiple blanks, there's a second thing that comes in, and that is this. How do the blanks relate to each other? So blank 1, how does that relate to blank 2? How does blank 2 relate to blank 3? Okay? And what you're going to find on this question, and it's completely crazy, but there really is no clue in the context that fills in any of these blanks. The entire game for this question is how the blanks relate to each other and finding a word for each blank that fits that relationship. So here's what I mean. Because of the author's blank, many readers consider his latest work blank. So look, because of this first blank, therefore the second blank, right? And I could fill this with anything. Because of the author's youth, right? The author's very young. Because of the author's youth, many readers consider his latest work childish, right? That would totally work. Those words aren't here, obviously, but that would work. But in reality, as many knowledgeable critics point out, the piece is very grown up. I mean, I could put anything in here. I could put anything in here as long as this happens. Blank 1, because of blank 1, therefore blank 2. And blank 1 and 2 are the opposite of blank 3. Okay? You could fill this in with anything you want to. And those words would work. The key is the actual answer choices themselves. So take a moment to look at this. See how many of these 9 words and phrases you know. And then we'll talk about matching them up to fit the relationship. Okay, we have eloquence, prejudice, verbosity, inaccessible, poignant, polarizing, lacks coherence and lucidity, has no discernible conclusion, is the most succinct on the subject. So what you're actually going to find is we have pairs of words that work here. So eloquence would make something poignant. Eloquence is well-spoken or well-written, and poignant means evoking emotion. So the author is well-spoken, well-written, and therefore evokes emotion. Or we could have this. The author is prejudiced and therefore is polarizing. So prejudice obviously is to, disfavor somebody for no reason, a group of people, you could be prejudiced. And then polarizing means to split people apart towards the poles. That totally works. Or we have verbosity, which has the root word verb, and then osity, which means something along the lines of lots of. So somebody who's verbosity, somebody who's verbose, uses lots of words. Okay? So verbosity would make somebody inaccessible, using so many words that it's like unreadable. So we actually have 3 different pairs here. Only one of these pairs is going to have an opposite over here. So is there anything that's completely the opposite of being eloquent and poignant? Well, something could evoke emotion and lack coherence. You know, something could still be poignant and lack coherence. Something could be poignant that has no conclusion. Something could be succinct and poignant. So actually, it's not going to be eloquence and poignant. Even though answer choice G isn't too bad on this, there's a better one. Prejudice and polarizing. So could somebody be polarizing and lack coherence? Oh yeah. You could just imagine somebody screaming, you know, sort of, you know, racial or gendered or some kind of threats. I mean, somebody that lacks coherence could be very polarizing. Has no discernible conclusion. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of things that are polarizing that are still going on. And is the most succinct. Twitter. Right? Twitter is amazingly polarizing and is very succinct. So it's not B and F. It's actually going to be verbosity and inaccessible. It's so wordy that people can't really understand it. Look at I, yet it's the most succinct on the subject. So readers consider he's verbose, and readers consider that inaccessible, but in reality it's the most succinct. So 2 things you have to do with multiple blanks. How do the blanks relate to each other? Even if there's only 2 blanks, how do they relate to each other? And then, is there something in the context that fills in one of those 2 blanks? In this case, there wasn't. And we had to rely just on this. You know what? That makes this like a 90th percentile question. This would be a very difficult question because of the fact that they don't give you any context. And the last thing that I want to talk about tonight, again, you know, join me for the Veritas course. Come in for the first class if you want to know about critical reasoning, reading comp. Also, we go through all the different quantitative question types. We only got to quant comparison today. So we've got more of that. Come to the first class with me at least. But I want to do sentence equivalence right now. Sentence equivalence is when you're going to pick 2 out of 6 to fit in that blank. And those 2 are going to give you synonymous sentences. Okay? The words themselves may not be synonymous, but the sentence has to be. Generally, the words will be synonyms. But the important thing is the meaning is synonymous. Okay? If a word doesn't have a synonym at all, then no matter how well it fits, it doesn't work out. You have to be able to put 2 words in here that gives you the same meaning. So we're thinking about the same things, folks. We're thinking about the same things, which is transitions, right? So the context, fill in the blank yourself if you can, and then, again, process of elimination, okay? So just take a moment or so and look at this one. Let's see if we can fill this in ourselves. And again, if you know 5 out of 6 of these words, you should be home free. If you know 4 out of 6, it could be a little bit dicey because you got to pick 2 of them, but you should still have a really good chance if you use that. Remember, focus on the words you know. While the cost of migrating to more automated piloting and air traffic control systems is substantial, okay? So even though, anytime they say while, I say even though. So even though the cost is substantial, the eventual cost savings are large enough that the upfront expenditures are not as bad unreasonable, right? Something like that. The expenditures are not as unreasonable as opponents claim, something like that. Now, I think that most of these words are going to be ones that folks know. Fiscal is a little bit different, but if you think about it from kind of a business perspective, fiscal policy, fiscal year, it just like is the financial, it just means financial, like spending. So you've got monetary policy, like the central bank, and you've got fiscal. So fiscal just means like, you know, just business, just spending, things like that. And then paltry might be a tougher one for some folks. Paltry just means not much. Okay? Paltry just means not much. Well, guess what? Neither one of those has a synonym here, and of course, neither one of those means unreasonable in any way. And reasonable, of course, is exactly the opposite. We're saying it's not as unreasonable. So we're not saying reasonable. So that comes down to B, D, and E. And this is a situation where synonyms on face value can get people into trouble, because excessive and massive are certainly, you know, seem to be good synonyms for each other. But in this case, it's going to be excessive and imprudent, because you can see imprudent really matches up very well with unreasonable. And excessive matches up better with unreasonable as well, because massive, it is massive. The cost of migrating is substantial. It is massive. Okay? And the fact that we have cost savings doesn't change that. It is massive, so cost savings doesn't change that. Whereas cost savings can make something not imprudent and not excessive. So massive is massive. There's no mitigating that. You know, if something costs $1 billion, that's massive. But if you save $1.5 billion later, then it's not unreasonable, right? And by the way, go ahead and loan me $1 billion, and I promise to pay you $1.5 billion in 20, I'm going to say 30 years, okay? And then it won't be that unreasonable, because I'll pay you back. You give me $1 billion now, I'll give you $1.5 billion, and we'll say 30 years. So that is the sentence equivalence. Again, focus on the words you do know. If, let's say you didn't know, something like paltry. Let's say you didn't know something like fiscal. Okay, let's say you only knew B, C, D, and E. But you understood that we're talking about something like unreasonable. Well, you've got imprudent, excessive, and massive. So you've got some words in there that work. And so focus on the ones you know, not the ones you don't know. So the GRE is a reasoning test, and today we focused on the skills and the strategy with a little bit of think like the test maker thrown in. And for more of this, be sure to join me for a course, and just the first lesson if you want to. The first lesson, you can sign up and check that one out for no charge. So veritasprep.com/GRE is where we can see these, and you can sign up for that. February 9th, Saturday, pretty much we'd be done right now. It's 1:30 to 4:30. We'd be done right now, about a half an hour ago. That's February 9th. March 12th is Tuesday, and April 1st is Monday. 7 p.m. Eastern Time on both of those. Those are upcoming courses. So I hope that helped you guys out on your GRE quest. If you've got other questions for me, type them into the chat box and do let me know. But thanks for spending a little bit of your Saturday with me, and I hope you guys found the strategy useful. And thanks to Veritas Prep for organizing this seminar. Thanks, guys. If you have questions, do let me know.